Aren't you guys so excited that we are in an environment that is so diverse that some of us during worship can just stand with our hands down? And some of us can, when we hear something, go, that's all right. And then some of us can just raise our hands and say, praise the Lord, thank the Lord. And there's nobody looking at us thinking, who is that person? That's because we are a diverse family here who allows us to worship in such a way that ministers to ourselves as individuals. Isn't that beautiful? I am a grateful believer who's holding on to the unyielding love of Christ, who's celebrating recovery from control and food addiction. My name is Cheryl Luke. Hi. As a young girl, my life seemed incredibly normal. My parents, as far as I knew, rarely argued. In fact, there was a great deal of laughter in our house. My mother was a wonderful homemaker and the best cook I've ever known. My father was in the military and completed his travel before I was born. Every Saturday morning, I'd wake up to his rumble of laughter as he watched his favorite cartoon, The Roadrunner. And each night before dinner, we blessed our food and recited Bible verses from memory. On Sunday mornings, my mother put me in a beautiful lace dress with ruffled underpants, patent leather shoes, and fold-over lace socks, and I could hardly stand being so done up. Church was always fun. I enjoyed Sunday school and the music, but the 2 hours in that frilly outfit was almost too much for this tomboy to endure. The ride home from church was entertaining too. We loaded into our car, we talked, we laughed, we argued the entire trip home. And I couldn't wait to get home to climb the mimosa tree perfectly situated in our front yard. Our home was secure and full of love. Family was our focal point, and my father was the center of my world. He could do no wrong. He was the man every child wanted to call daddy. Our house was the one in our neighborhood that was home base for Friday night shenanigans, hide and seek, dodgeball, foxes cross the river, and Red Rover. Every family on our street had a signature whistle. When our father stepped foot on the porch to call us home, we'd better be on our way before they got to the end of their respective whistle. There was always a sense of excitement when my father walked in after a long day of work. It was a perfect world, and I loved everything about it until that one day he walked in after work. Something felt different. He was distant, and even at my young age, I could feel the temperature drop as he passed by. Walking resolute as if on mission, he didn't acknowledge me as he passed through the living room toward the closet at the end of our hallway. I watched as he began to remove his things and place them in a bag. I knew something was incredibly wrong because he didn't speak a word. He didn't pick me up and toss me over his head like he did every other day of my life. My young heart and mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. I watched his every move in utter disbelief. It felt as everything was standing still, except his deliberate, unfamiliar action. What was happening? In an instant, my perfect world changed. The rug was ripped out from under me, and it threw me to the ground. After what felt like an eternity, my mother's call jolted me out of my daze. We gathered together in their bedroom for a family meeting. My father began to explain that he was leaving. I leaned in, listened closely, and latched onto his every word, as if I could grab each one and pound them into the linoleum like 10 pegs and keep him from going away. I was powerless to change his mind. He would be moving and I was not going with him. I could not believe what I was hearing. He told us he would be living in a boarding house on the other side of town, and he promised to call. He would come to visit and we would be a part of every holiday. Life wouldn't change that much. Though I couldn't quite wrap my head around what was going on, I held tightly to every promise he made. Why wouldn't I believe him? He was my daddy. He was perfect, and I was his favorite child. He promised. Truth came to light the day my father's mother came to visit and refused to stay with him. I was outside, standing by my mimosa tree, when my grandparents pulled up. As I braced myself for my grandmother's tight hug and that loathsome bite on my ear, she rushed past me like a freight train, fussing under her breath about a bunch of nappy-headed kids running around. Who was she talking about? What nappy-headed kids? I would find out quickly that my father had another family on the other side of town, and he chose to live with them. He chose them. There's a period in my life after my father left that I can't recall because my world seemed frozen in time. I continually questioned my mother about my father's leaving. Looking back, I can't imagine how painful it must have been as she patiently answered my questions and comforted my broken heart while facing her own questions and gathering the pieces of her own shattered dreams. All the while, her faith remained her bulwark. Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2 was her lifeline and became mine. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge, my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. Reality became inescapable down the road. In the beginning, he fulfilled most of his promises. However, numerous times I waited with excitement for my father to come over, but he started not showing up. I would sit patiently on the couch waiting for him to come at any moment. Friends would stop by, pleading for me to come outside. I desperately wanted to play, but I couldn't risk leaving in fear of missing my dad. Even my beloved mimosa tree couldn't will me outside. Anticipation melted like a popsicle on the hot cement as minutes turned to hours and hours to days and days to weeks. Promises proved to be empty. What began as hopeful anticipation turned to utter devastation in every sense of the word. I wondered what I did to cause him to walk out and then not show up. I was to blame. I just knew it. My young mind couldn't navigate the depth of pain my soul endured. This is when food entered my world as my comforter and my companion. While my mother gave us permission to ask questions and express our feelings, she never allowed us to talk negatively about our father. She could have easily hated him and allowed us to hate him as well. Instead, she insisted that we pray and call him every week. She modeled the characteristics of virtue and grace in the midst of her pain. This was my first personal encounter of Christ-like character. Things changed quickly and drastically for our family. We didn't have much money after my father left. We went from enjoying typical middle-class luxuries to going without life's essentials. Financial support didn't come immediately or easily. And even when money was coming in, it wasn't enough to cover our basic needs. There were many times we had no idea where our next meal was going to come from. My mother was determined to trust God. She didn't drive, so we had to count on the goodwill of our friends for simple conveniences like a trip to the grocery store. When our electricity was turned off due to non-payment, our neighbors allowed us to string an extension cord from their house to ours. That's how you do it. Until my mom could afford to pay the bill. And on cold winter nights, we'd huddle around the oven and then sleep together in the living room to stay warm. When I asked how our needs were going to be met, her response never changed. From your Father in heaven. Countless times, I heard Mama singing her prayers and calling on the name of Jesus from the very depths of her soul. Mostly at night when we were trying to sleep. And most nights, lying in my bed, I would hear her pray. And it sounded like this. Jesus, bless my children, cover them, Lord, heal them, protect them, remove every friend that's not from you. And I'd say, no, 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 Lord, don't do it. Don't do that, Lord. Those prayers prayers shaped my life. My mother's faith was foundational. It was contagious and necessary as I walked through this difficult season in my life. As the years passed, my personality shifted from fun-loving to introspective. I went from believing everyone loved me to thinking no one really wanted me around. This mindset plagued my existence for most of my life, but still food was my companion and consolation. As high school came to an end, I realized I wasn't quite ready to enter college, and my mother made it clear that no child of hers would be sitting around her home without a job. And I remembered my love for dolls. In truth, as a little girl, I enjoyed receiving dolls just so I could cut their hair. And got in trouble for it. So I enrolled in the School of Cosmetology. After a few years working as a cosmetologist, I made my way to Oral Roberts University to keep change in my pocket. I did other people's hair. And when university became too expensive, I moved back home. And I met a man who attended our church, and he needed a place to stay. And my mother agreed to allow him to live with us in our little apartment, and it was attached to our home. We became quick friends and began dating. And soon after we started dating, he raped me, and it rocked my world. After that dreadful experience, I remember immediately running to the shower, trying to wash away the inconspicuous filth I felt permeating my mind, body, and soul. Then I made the immediate choice to marry him. In my brokenness, I thought it was the right thing to do. In the short time we lived as husband and wife, and before divorcing, I came to the harsh reality that not all families got along and don't speak to each other for days. It was shocking, since my mother, Mama Luke, didn't tolerate nonsense of any kind in her home. When we fought as kids, we had to talk it out, get on our knees, hold hands, and pray for each other after receiving that rod of correction. Mama Luke didn't play, y'all. Mama Luke did not play. So we learned to get along. Things began to deteriorate the moment we arrived home from our wedding. In a few short months, we made the decision to separate. While separating our belongings, we began to argue. And before I knew it, he threw me to the ground, straddled his legs across my body, and began to choke me. As I lay there helplessly grasping for air, his thumbs pressed against my trachea. I thought he was going to kill me. Somehow, and thankfully, I escaped. And in the midst of all that madness, a friend invited me to visit her in Austin over the Thanksgiving holiday. And during that trip, I realized I needed to leave El Paso, where I'd lived, or I'd end up dead or in a mental facility. I moved the very next month. My first course of action was to locate a church home. It took a phone book and a few weeks to find the church I attend today. That was 26 years ago. The local church is one of the most powerful institutions on the planet and has been a stabilizing force in my life. My divorce was finalized after moving to Austin. I felt incredible relief. I also felt like a miserable failure and unsuspectingly continued to deal with the pain through the silence and ease of an unintentional addiction to food. Somehow, eating French fries, whether hungry or not, made me feel better, although the feeling never lasted. In 1995, we found out that my mother, the matriarch and glue to our family, had colon cancer, and she passed away. How would I live without the strength behind my existence? We talked every day. She prayed for me. She was my confidant and my counsel. And now she was gone. I suffered the loss of her death, again in silent pain, and kept moving forward, finding temporary gratification and relief from food, my lifelong companion. In 1998, I was shocked to learn that I had uterine cancer. And given our family's history of cancer, there was no question for discussion about treatment. I would have a hysterectomy. And with that, my lifelong dream of giving birth was just now a dream. In 2000, my doctor discovered thyroid cancer. Really, what was wrong with me? I simply could not control my life. However, food was something I could control, and I did that very well. In 2001, I doubled over at work and was rushed to my doctor. After examination, I was informed that my appendix was about to burst. They discovered fluid in my appendix that could potentially contain cancerous cells. I couldn't even win at living cancer-free in my mind. Thankfully, they were wrong. I had an appendectomy and recovered, but I continued to find solace and comfort in food. Most of my life, I've served in the church, leading children's ministry, young adults, women's ministry, singing on the worship teams, and traveling internationally, speaking and serving on missions. I've helped oversee large productions and events, yet somehow my life was continually unraveling right before my eyes. In 2002, I moved to my current job where I have the opportunity to work and serve with some of the most amazing people in our community. Life seemed to balance out over the next few years, yet the addiction to food continued to increase, and I was unaware. In 2009, I was determined to take steps to reconcile my relationship with my father. I planned a trip to El Paso in August of that year. At the last minute, I decided to postpone my trip due to work commitments. My father died the very next month. This incident activated a very slow, gradual, and deliberate emotional downward spiral that would last several years. I experienced several life challenges and transitions with family and friends. In my head, I released these painful situations over to the care of God. But in truth, subconsciously told myself, just keep moving forward, girl, one foot in front of the other. Looking back, my relationship with food seemed to be what brought the motivation and comfort I needed to stay on my feet. It was just a short-term fix. In August of 2014, I became the Celebrate Recovery pastor as a result of a staffing transition. I was not excited, and quickly, I said, Lord, you got tricks. I was not excited and quickly realized the enormity of what I was now responsible for. CR is not a side hustle or a small department within a church culture. It's a ministry. What had I gotten myself into? I immediately fell in love with the team and the attendees. February 2015 was a breaking point. I had a verbal altercation with a coworker. It sent me reeling and was the beginning of my undoing. I felt alone. I felt like I didn't have anyone to help me navigate the details of this awful experience. I had to keep moving forward. Food became a warm blanket of comfort on a cold winter day. It was all I could do to get up, go to work, and get back home. As I planned to launch a women's step study, I realized I was without a leader. I resolutely and boastfully said to myself, I'm also the women's pastor, and I've also led thousands of women over the years. I will take these hurting women through a step study. I'm happy to participate in their healing. Little did I know that God was tricking me into my very own recovery journey. My life was about to get toe up. I quickly realized that I had more issues than I knew what to do with. And food addiction was at the top of the list. You see, when my father walked out of my life, I subconsciously began a quiet and constant love-hate relationship with food. It brought comfort and never talked back or walked out on me. Food was available for celebrations, heartbreak, chaos, peace. Yet I hated the short-term calming effect followed by shame and I couldn't control its devastating grip. Romans 7:15 says, I don't understand myself at all, for I really want to do what is right, but I can't. I do what I don't want to, what I hate. I know perfectly well that what I am doing is wrong, and my bad conscience proves that I agree with these laws. With these laws I am breaking, but I can't stop myself because I'm no longer doing it. It is sin inside me that's stronger than I am that makes me do these evil things. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Although weight gain was a slow and consistent over the years, when I tried to lose weight, I was never successful. I realized I had an addiction. In the lesson 2 in The Journey Begins is called Powerless. When I read the word powerless, my heart sank. This is exactly how I felt, incapable of making anything in my life work out. As I began to read Principle 1, realize I am not God. I admit that I am powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing and that my life is unmanageable. My heart sank again, and I realized I had control issues. As I began to work this step, I embarked on another emotional downward spiral and was unsure I would ever recover. I walked away from that lesson for a moment because I couldn't concentrate. I gathered the nerve to ask my sister this very simple question. Do you think I'm controlling? Well, if you've been around my family, you know we can have a complete conversation with just one look. Her answer was inaudible. Her look said everything. And she caught herself as she could tell I was having difficulty processing. I couldn't understand how I, this mild-mannered Christian ministry leader, was controlling. It was just too much. At that time, I needed a break, and God delivered. A friend of mine won a business trip to Canada and asked if I would go along. Yes, I needed to get away. I didn't care where, I just needed a break. I didn't want to see or talk to anyone I knew. As she was unpacking, she could not contain her excitement. She was flitting around the room saying, girl, God bless me with this trip. I'm gonna reset. And when we get back to Austin, I'm gonna reset. And in my mind, I said, girl, you go on and reset. I'm going to sleep for a few days. I will check you later. Then I heard a whisper in my heart. It's time for you to reset. And this is when my recovery kicked in. When I returned to Austin, I made an appointment. And as my doctor talked about the changes I needed to make, I began to shut down emotionally. His words began to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher in my head. I couldn't handle the reality of my next steps. I had to break off this lifelong relationship with my closest companion, food. Then I remembered there was McDonald's right across the street. A Big Mac and fries. Surprisingly, I began to calm down. And this is when I realized that this would be the last time food would control my life. I knew that my life was unmanageable, and I was acutely aware that my life was not what it appeared to be. I was hollow, empty, insecure, angry, isolated, out of control, and alone in my Christian world. Romans 7:18 says, for I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Proverbs 11:14 says, where there is no guidance, the people will fail. But in the abundance of wise and godly counselors, there is victory. I knew I could not embark upon this healing journey on my own. My accountability partner and my sponsor were heaven's gifts to me, and we worked each step together. Food no longer holds center stage in my life. My relationship with God is my source of strength. He is my comfort. He is my peace, and it's everlasting. Freedom from addictions, hurts, hang-ups, and habits is possible. We have access to a forever family who will stand by to encourage and challenge us toward continued victory. Newcomer, keep coming back. I initially thought that somehow through my recovery journey, I would get this weight off and move on. But I found that I still struggle with food, and the struggle is real. You see, food is not illegal. We have to eat. But food has lost its grip on me, and I'm learning to manage my food and my emotions separately. I honestly feel born again, and find it much easier to live my mission, to engage, influence, and equip the generations to embrace their unique design by living with intention. Thank you for letting me share.